now.
God damn it. It's okay. We'll cut all this out.
No, we won't.
No, we're going to leave this in. Just a couple minutes of dead air right at the start. Cool. Welcome to the No Experience Podcast, where two dudes who are well below the poverty line are here to talk about anything and everything. I'm Ammar Abdullah, and I'm joined as always by my scrumptious co-host, Jared Hines. And today, we are going to talk about the mistreatment of minimum wage workers. So, Jared, how many jobs have you worked, like in life? I know that you're something of an unemployed
deadbeat.
man. I wasn't going to say it, but I know that you generally don't work a lot of jobs. But how many have you worked?
3 or 4.
3 or 4 jobs. And of those jobs, how many of them paid you minimum wage?
1 or 2 of them.
Okay. I have worked so far. Let's put ready for the counting game. We're gonna play the counting game. All right. I worked for the newspaper.
1.
I worked at Fred Meyer.
A 2.
At Subway.
A 3.
Worked at Savers.
A 4.
Worked at Alpha Beta Unlimited
A
Games.
5.
I worked at Partner Hero.
6.
And I worked at Spin Scooters.
7.
And pretty soon, I will have moved on to my 8th job.
8.
It's the count.
Get it? Because he counts.
Yeah, like Sesame Street. And of those jobs, I think 2 of them, maybe 3 of them, 4 actually, because Savers, Subway, Fred Meyer, and the Statesman, which is our local newspaper, paid me minimum wage. The Statesman actually paid me less than minimum wage, because it's a commission-based job. So, you know, you get paid by the newspaper, basically. Which it was something insane, like a dime per newspaper at the time. And because I was working with my stepdad and not legally on the payroll myself, I got, you know, a portion of whatever he made. So we've sort of come here to talk about how badly minimum wage workers are mistreated in America, which is to say, quite badly. It really is kind of a harrowing thing to look at, right? That you can be at a job for 40 full fucking hours of a shift, right, and make $300. You know, that's an ugly little thing, isn't it?
It is.
So what do you think, Jared? What's your take on this?
Well, I mean, it's a pretty popular take. I think it's fucked up. I hear so many horror stories from like a shit ton of my friends who are just trying to survive, who like get a shit ton of people who come into their store or wherever the fuck they work, and they just treat them like dog shit.
Of course.
Like there's somebody who I know who like goes home, who like cries on shift and then goes home and cries like after every workday.
Yeah, I'm familiar with that. Working at the board game store, I cried after a lot of my shifts.
I just like that should not have to be a thing at all. And I feel like that should be pretty straightforward.
Yeah, you would think, right? But capitalism is such that if they can afford to pay you nothing, they would, right? If they were allowed to pay you nothing, they would do it. Because, you know, it would hurt their bottom line to have to pay you something fair, right? Yeah, it's sort of a common take right now that minimum wage workers are getting fucked across the board, right? The minimum wage it's too low, right? The poverty line is too low, for that matter. I know plenty of people, plenty of families across America who are poor as dirt, right? But above the poverty line, right? The poverty line is like, it's something like $18,000, $19,000 a year for a family of 4. That's nothing.
Yeah, that's dog shit.
That's not. You can't afford most apartments on the cost of $19,000 a year, right? And really, I make somewhere in the realm of like close to $35,000 a year, and I struggle to survive on that level of income, right? So I think, the main argument, right, that I come here with, and the main thing that I want to talk about is that the minimum wage is too low and the poverty line is too low. Both need to go up, or one or the other needs to go up, right? If the poverty line is increased, more people can benefit from social programs designed to help people beneath the poverty line, right? That's a consistent position, a good position, right? If the minimum wage goes up, the poverty line can stay where it is. Either one of those is a good solution. But as of yet, radical changes to those two basic principles have been avoided by most businesses because they think, like if you give more money to the worker bees, right, you give more money to the people at the bottom or in the middle, the people at the top get less money. So they can't do that, can they? It's an ugly little thing. And you see it across the board, right? You see it with small local businesses. You see it with big corporate businesses, right? And whereas small local businesses can make the argument that they legitimately can't afford to pay you more, a major corporation can. They can afford to pay you more, like a lot of the big corporations are posting record profits. They posted record profits last year. And the more conservatively minded among us might be willing to kind of, argue that, the reason that minimum wage jobs exist is for teenagers, right? People just joining the workforce, high school kids, basically, right? I've heard that argument from a lot of conservatives who will say that, the reason that minimum wage positions can't pay more than they do is because, it's majority kids in high school, college kids, people who can afford to be out of work. Statistically, that doesn't seem to burr out. You'll find that generally speaking, most people working minimum wage positions are people trying to support a family. So I don't know. What opinions do we have about the minimum wage as a concept, like as it exists right now? Do you think it's a good thing? Do you think it's a bad thing? Do you think it needs to be higher? Do you think there's some other X factor that needs to be changed? What do you think, Jared?
Well, I think it's a good idea because, like we touched on earlier already, if there wasn't a minimum, like a legal federal minimum wage, employers, particularly ones, large corporations, would just practically pay you nothing.
Yeah, I mean, they have a profit incentive to pay you less, right? I mean, strictly, it makes sense that they wouldn't want to pay you so much, right? Okay, so we agree that the minimum wage is a good thing. Do you think it should be higher?
I do.
Okay. What do you think of the arguments that raising the minimum wage can cause
prices to inflate?
Inflation across the board. What do you think of that argument? Because I know what I think of it.
I know what I think of it too, and there will be inflation. There will. They're not wrong. In fact, there's already a case of it. I think it was in fucking Norway.
Mm-hmm.
McDonald's raised their minimum wage was raised to like 10 something an hour, and you know what happened? The Big Mac went up by like a quarter.
Yeah, right. Like. It's, the dramatic inflation rates that conservatively minded people point to in regards to raising the minimum wage operate on two very bad assumptions. The first assumption is that the cost of living hasn't already been going up. It has. Inflation should be tied to the minimum wage. The minimum, not the other way around, right? Minimum wage should not rise up to account for inflation. It should rise automatically as, prices inflate, right? And they have been. The cost of living has gone up. I saw some insane statistic the other day that said the cost of owning a home where we live, right, in Idaho, shot up 52% last year. That's insane.
It is.
And the fact that wages haven't risen to accommodate for it is insane because it means now that you can't afford a home. You just can't. If you are working a standard, well-paying job in Boise, Idaho, you cannot afford to have a home. You can't even afford a mortgage, right? You need to be earning like $70,000 a year in order to afford that. That's almost 4 times the poverty line, right? It's crazy to me that, people can look at the minimum wage and be like, oh, well, it'll cause some sense of hyperinflation. It won't. Not really. Not in the way you think it will. McDonald's, Burger King, restaurants, grocery stores, places that have seen like a lot of people quit their jobs recently have increased their wages. And lo and behold, nothing's that much more expensive. No, everything is pretty much the same cost with them paying their workers a living wage.
If anything, I feel like if we see prices inflate a shit ton, I would imagine it's because those manufacturers of those products are actively pushing up the price in the hopes that we'll bump the minimum wage back down so they can keep their money.
Yeah, which I think the minimum wage is kind of a ratchet effect. If you're not familiar with what the ratchet effect is, it's a political, rhetorical device that says that, it's a ratchet, right? Whereas a thing is pushed in one direction, it can't go back the other way. I think the minimum wage is similar. It's a ratchet effect where as it goes up, it can't come back down. Economically, socially, it cannot be returned to a lower point because as it ratchets up, right, and people get accustomed to that cost of living, you can't bring it back down. Not really. That's my opinion on that, right, is that even if the minimum wage starts to go up and people like lobbyists and political pundits and corporate entities start to attempt to bring it back down, they can't. Because the people adjust too much to the cost of, to the standard of living that a higher base wage brings them. So that's my opinion on that, on the idea that that corporations have the ability to bring wages back down. They can only bring them up. It can't come back down.
I think that's a really insightful take, actually.
At least I don't know for sure that that's the case, but if you held a gun to my head and said, what do you think about whether or not corporations can bring the minimum wage back down? I would say they can't. It can only go up from where it's at right now, and where it's at right now is too low. So what we really need to do is ratchet up the minimum wage so that it's consistent, right? And the argument you'll hear from people is it's like, if you raise up the minimum wage to $15, everybody who's currently making $15 an hour is making, now they're making minimum wage. Their dollar is now worth less, right? Not so. Not the case. Because if you raise the minimum wage, you should expect, as employees, as members of a workforce, that your wages go up too. If I'm making $15 an hour right now, and the guy next to me is making minimum wage $7.25, the federal, and his minimum wage shoots up to 15, I should not continue to be making 15. I should now be making like $21 an hour. That everything should go up because everything is more expensive, right? So if everyone's, wage goes up relative to the new minimum wage, you can now just afford to buy more. And they can't continue to inflate the prices higher and higher because the level of income inequality that generates is like astronomical, right? If corporate entities begin to raise the cost of living and, the cost of buying goods and services higher and higher on account of minimum wage being raised, there's a certain plateau that they reach where suddenly you're Germany in the 30s, right? And you're burning money by the wheelbarrows just to buy a loaf of bread, right? And I don't think anyone wants that. I think that they are intentionally misleading people to convince them not to demand a better wage. So all of this kind of boils down to the corporate entity's ability to mistreat its workers, right? And it comes down to something that I have been looking into recently. Something that is a very interesting topic that I think if more liberal-minded people read up on it, they would agree. The most important thing that we as people can do, like as workers, as members of the workforce, as brothers in labor, the most important thing that we can do is unionize. We need the Reagan dismantled unions in the 80s, right? They were completely taken apart pretty much. Unions have no power right now. We need a new national labor movement. We need to unionize as workers so that we can fight for a better life for ourselves, right? And I'm not talking just, people in, what have been traditionally unionized fields, right? I'm not talking just construction. I'm not talking just factory work. I'm talking everything, right? Some unsolicited advice for our audience and for you as well, if you're interested in the idea of collective action and unionizing as workers to increase our standard of living.
I am.
There's a great YouTuber. He's called Paul's Ego. I'll drop a link to his channel in the description so that you can go read up on him and listen to some of the things he said about collective bargaining rights, as unionizing of workers. But as he's explained it, is you can unionize, you can get a new national labor movement that encompasses all facets of the American economic system. Right? We're talking tech support. We're talking fast food. We're talking, general food service. We're talking grocery stores. We're talking department stores. We're talking everything, right? And you can do that as a collective, right? There's some growing pains associated with it, right? You need to mostly drop political shit, right? You can't bring politics into it because it's not about this person's opinion of you, right? It's not about a right-wing person's opinion of gay people. It's not about a left-wing person's opinion of white people. It's about standing on the line together as brothers in labor, right? We all have to work for our money, and as long as we do, that is a consistent factor among everybody. Workers get fucked. We're getting fucked right now, and we're going to continue to get fucked unless we come together as a collective and fight for a better workforce, right? A better job for ourselves.
Yeah, better wages, better treatment.
Yeah, exactly. We go as a collective to these corporate entities and we tell them, we're not, take Amazon, right? A terrible place to work. It treats their employees horribly. They'll insist otherwise, but we all know what's really going on. There's been too much literature on how people are treated in Amazon fulfillment warehouses for you to ignore it at this point.
Piss bottles,
crying sheds and shit like that, right? So take that as an example, right? If everybody as warehouse workers who worked at Amazon were to come together as a collective and stand with one another and say, you know what? We're not pulling your orders. We're not gonna do it. We're gonna stand outside of this warehouse and no orders are going out that door. Amazon starts to tank, right? Guess who's fucking not getting their, flat screen delivered to them via Amazon, Suddenly you realize workers have power, but we only have power as a collective, right? So that's why it's so exciting to me, right? Have you seen the people who are walking out of jobs and how fast food joints are, sort of being forced to close early, being forced to, not open on some days because workers are walking out? Mm-hmm. I love that. I see that shit and I'm like, you know what? I am willing to not be able to go out to Subway and get a sandwich if it means that the people who work there are engaging in collective action.
Oh, yeah.
They're engaging in bettering their station in life. I love that.
I care more about people's well-being than I do my food.
Exactly, right? I'll eat. I'll find a way to eat, right? Like, I'll go to the grocery store. I'll cook myself something, whatever, right?
I can make a sandwich at home.
Yeah, exactly. If I want a sandwich so bad, I'll make one at home, right? What's more important to me is that the people who are forced to make those sandwiches can afford to live. They don't die of something like tooth decay, right? Or a broken arm, They're able to pay. They have health care. They have money to pay for goods and services, and maybe they have a little bit of money to go out and do something fun on the weekends, right? Like that. I don't think. Well, is that such a bad thing?
No.
Yeah, I don't think that's such a bad thing. So I think we're coming up on the crux of what we want to advise people to do here, which is, if your job is bad, if you are dissatisfied with something that's happening at your workplace, if they don't pay you enough, right? If they have, harassers in the workplace, abusers in the workplace, and you don't like them, right? And you think that they're bad and toxic for the workplace, right? If you have any number of issues with your workplace, stand up, group up together, form a strike, fight back against the idea that you are not worth the amount of your labor, because you are. And, if this sounds like a fanciful notion, right? The idea that you can stand up next to your brothers and sisters at your job, believe me, it's not, right? It's happened. It can happen again. It's happening right now. There's people out there right now fighting for their money, fighting for their labor to be worth what it's worth, right? And it's so sad to me that people have lost the idea that you can stand in solidarity with your coworkers even if you disagree with them, right? I wish so badly when I worked at the board game store that I had organized a strike. because everybody was getting fucked there. Everybody was having a bad time working at this board game store. You know, nobody made shit for wages. The work was hard. It was long hours. You were working 10-hour shifts 4 days in a row, right? Like, you know, you would close one day, have to come in the very next day and open, right? That was me. I had to close on Monday, come right back in on Tuesday and open, right? 10-hour shifts back to back, right? 40-hour work week. That's 4 10-hour shifts, one day after another. That sucked. That was awful. And I had to deal with assholes. I had to deal with the shittiest people, and I was not being compensated fairly for my work. I did not have health insurance. I basically had the choice between vision or dental insurance and no health insurance.
Jesus Christ.
Yeah, a terrible job, right? And I think that if I had talked to my coworkers, if I had gotten all of them as outraged with that job as I was, we would have been paid fairly. Because I saw the house that the owner of that board game store lived in. You know, it's the 6th largest retailer of Magic the Gathering cards in the world. I saw the kind of house that guy got to live in. I saw that he had a personal theater in his house. He had Steelbook Blu-rays. He had, like, you know, all the video games. This dude was living the high life while people under him in his retail store were starving. Is that fair? I think not. And I think that if I had organized, if I had had the gusto to stand up with my coworkers, who are my brothers and my sisters, who are in the trenches suffering the same mistreatment at the hands of these customers that I am, they would have gone with me. And all I had to do was tell them. And all I had to do was organize and bring them together in the idea that we deserve better than we're getting. Right? And that's all you have to do. Really? You just have to organize with your coworkers, you know, and I hesitate to call them coworkers. Fuck coworkers, right? These are your brothers in arms, right? They're your brothers in labor. You get with them and you tell them, doesn't it suck that we're making peanuts, right? That we make a penny and our boss makes a dime, you know? Doesn't that suck? Wouldn't it be better if it was more like we make a nickel and our boss still makes a dime? Wouldn't that be so much better, right? It's possible. You just have to come together as workers, right? And recognize that the political shit can wait, right? That before we can focus on fixing social issues, before we can focus on, you know, repairing transphobia, homophobia, racism, sexism, right? Any number of social issues, before we can focus on that, we got to be able to afford to live, right? You got to be able to, if you get sick, go to the doctor. You got to be able to, if, you know, your leg gets broken, get a cast for it. You know, like, that to me is the first thing. I'm something of a class reductionist in that I think every issue, pretty much, in our modern world, most of the social issues boil down to the warfare of the 1% on the 99%, class warfare, right? I genuinely believe that, right? And, you know, I'm an optimist. I believe in the brotherhood of all humanity, and that if we band together, we're capable of some crazy shit. So that's my tirade about the minimum wage and collective action, Jared. I've talked a lot this episode because it's something I'm very passionate about, but is there anything that you need to say that you feel absolutely vindicated in communicating to our audience?
I mean, right now, I kind of want to jump off what you were talking about when it comes to taking care of, you know, surviving before we take care of social issues.
Absolutely.
I find that fascinating because it's very reminiscent of Maslow's triangle for
the hierarchy of needs.
Yeah. Because they're like basic needs that you need to satisfy first before you can move up a peg on this hierarchy. And then you take care of those, you move up.
Yeah.
And like, this is the very bottom rung of this hierarchy.
Yeah, being able to eat, being able to have water, being able to go to a doctor if you are sick, right? Like, that's the basic shit, right? I think any ideal utopian society is built on the idea that your basic needs should be met, right? Does anyone fucking disagree?
No.
I'd invite anyone to come to me and disagree with that idea, because how can you refute it, right? How can you refute it? Every human needs to eat. Every human needs to be able to get water. Every human needs to have a place to lay their head. Every human needs to be able to get medical care if they're living in the richest country in the world and are sick, right? Like that's basic stuff, right? And once that's solved, we can move on to solving issues like, systemic oppression and income inequality and the racism in the racism in the police force. All of that stuff is important. I'm not trying to downplay the importance of things like tackling police brutality, pride, right? Gay pride, transgender pride. I'm not trying to downplay that shit. I'm just saying that I think at the base of it, the most important thing we can do is make sure that the government, that our country meets our basic needs, right? Because it doesn't for most people. People literally have to choose between rent and food. You have any idea how fucking crazy that is? How insane that is that we can live in the richest country, supposedly the best country in the world,
quote unquote,
and not be able to get to have both food and a house. You have to pick one or the other? That's insane to me, right? Like, so that's the basis of my argument, right? I don't want to downplay anyone's suffering, right? Everybody's had, I've experienced racism in my own life, right? Growing up an Arab in the early 2000s, let me tell you, not fun, not easy, and it sucked. But what was a lot shittier? Growing up poor. That sucks. And we shouldn't have as many poor people in this country as we do. We shouldn't have as many poor people in this world as we do. So, if you want my opinion, and I'm sure you do, that's it, right? Like, you gotta... the hierarchy of needs, right? Like you said, do the baseline shit first, and then once we're done with that, we can focus on everything else.
I think that's as good a place as any to end it. This will probably be a much shorter episode by the time we post it, which we apologize for. Some stuff came up, but we hope that you enjoyed it regardless, or were fired up. I don't know. We hope that you were emotionally engaged.
Yeah, whatever possible engagement you can have with our podcast, if you love it, if you hate it, we like it. We're down to hear conversation. We're down to hear differing viewpoints on this idea.
We're on Facebook. We're on Ammar's Twitter at The Donging Man. If you like us and you haven't already, feel free to subscribe. Leave a like. It helps us out. Algorithm and shit.
Yeah,
and
crack the bell notification if you want, if you want to be notified when our shit comes out.
Ding, 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 ding. We love you. Have a good day. Bye.
Bye. Conservatives.